Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining today. Happy time zone. It's another 425 show. We've got some guests lined up today and we've got some live demos for you. So hopefully you're tuning in and you're excited to learn about what we're intent on showing. So without further ado here, I'm going to bring my guests on from the backstage. So we've got Liberth, we've got Greg, and we've got Callian. Unfortunately, Callian's having some problems with his webcam, but you do see him show up here. So he'll be able to interact with folks throughout the course of the show today. So without further ado, maybe let's intro each of you a little bit, or at least have you talk a little bit about your role at Microsoft.
You can go first,
Sure.
Greg.
Yeah, why not? I'll start. And hey, Shannon. So I'm Greg Taylor. I'm a principal PM in Microsoft 365 core engineering. I focus on Exchange. I focus on security in particular. And I'm the PM that is turning off basic auth in Exchange Online for everyone.
You're everybody's friend right
year.
now is what it sounds like, right?
I mean, I'm protecting people from being compromised by basic auth. But how they respond to that, sometimes I'm their friend. Sometimes I'm just causing them work. But it's all for a good cause.
And then Liberth, do you want to talk a little bit about your role at Microsoft?
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, my name is Lubert. I work for the Graph CPX team. So I am a senior PM, and my role is pretty much making sure our partners and customers have a good experience using the Graph API. I also work in the same team Greg is doing. We have different scopes, different functions, but I normally work with the people consuming mail and events over Graph API, but also has to do with some legacy APIs as the one we're going to discuss today.
Very cool. And then Callie, do you want to do a little bit of an intro into your role at Microsoft and what you work on each day?
Yeah, hi Shannon. I work as a senior program manager, product manager in the Identity Division CXP team. Essentially, I work with developers and businesses who are integrating with various features of our platform, focused on the MSOL library and Microsoft Graph in general.
Okay. Very cool. So the premise behind today, so we had our intro stream yesterday and Greg handled questions, explained and demystified why we're trying to do this to protect folks. And there were a lot of interesting questions and folks participating. Today is the actual live demo. So should I just share your screen? How do you want to start this? Maybe start with the screen share?
We can do that. Just as a matter of introduction, the whole story is, Rick and I were having this conversation. I haven't developed professionally in 7 or 8 years, right? And we were talking about how hard or how complicated it is for people to actually go and change their applications using basic Auth right now, and convert them to use modern Auth. So the exercise we decided to do was to actually have myself using the coding skills that I have from my previous experience and try it out, right? So my first time using EWS, first time in this case doing the conversion, right? Trying to understand what could be the common questions that people would have out there when doing this. And that's where Callian also comes in the picture, because a lot of these questions that I had, I was going to Callian. He's from the identity team. He has a lot of knowledge, and he works supporting people like me in this case, who used to code these applications 2015, 2016, when EWS was in its hype, right? And now they have to go back to those applications and readapt and rethink them to use the modern Auth. So the idea is to, I found this over here. I know you can share the URL, right?
Yeah.
There you go. Perfect. So this one gives you a few steps to start using OAuth. First step is to register the application. Then you go and configure to do the code changes to user app ID, tenant ID. And at the end, you pretty much call EWS the same way you were doing it before. And it's supposed to work, okay? So if we go to the code, instead of doing live coding, I already put some code together. And I'm gonna go through the questions that I had initially when I was doing this. Okay.
Okay.
Perfect. So if we go, let me just get a new with a browser over here. When you go to the first step, it's asking you to register an application. This is the one that I registered.
Would you want to actually make that a little bit larger? There you go. Yep. Perfect.
Perfect. So if you go to the new registration, you use like a name for your app. This is the first question that I had. So Kellyanne, while I create this application, would you mind giving us just a quick overview on when to use a single tenant application versus a multi-tenant? In this case, I'm going to go for multi-tenant.
Okay. I mean, usually if you're an application for your own business. Sorry, I thought it was a question for me, so I basically took it. Do you want me to know when to use single tenant versus multi-tenant, or you want to?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, so that's what I said. Usually, if you're building an application that's for your own business or a line of business application for what we refer to as your own Azure AD tenant, you would basically use single tenant. When you use multi-tenant, your application can be used in any of the millions of Azure AD tenants out there. If your requirements is such, then you would go multi-tenancy. But as far as the code that we have available for developers here, it doesn't matter. This code will work in either of those two cases.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And then if you continue using this guide that we have over here, the next step is to just give me a second to get the other one over here on the screen. Next step is to set the redirect URI. And this is where I also found an issue, let's say, and I had to tweak it a little bit. So going to the code, if we get back to the tutorial, that you have this application created. You don't need a secret for this one. You only need to remember or to copy, have handy the application ID and the tenant ID. These are the two parameters that you would use to retrieve the token from your code. Okay. So if we go back to the code, and this is something that I also found in here. So at the end, this is also in the link that we shared. The first thing you have to do is create this object, the public line application options. You provide that application ID and that tenant ID that we were just seeing before when you created the application and registration in the Azure DevOps, right? Then after that, when I tried the application for the first time, we're not using this over here. This is not in the documentation. This one sets the redirection URI after the login for the one that we set up in the application. So if you go to the documentation, I already created a GitHub issue to get this updated. It's not going to run initially. The first time you run it, you're going to get an exception because the redirect URI is not matching the one that we configured in the Azure portal, right?
Okay.
So, this is pretty much it. It's super simple. If you go to the basic Auth program that people are normally or probably used to, just give me a second to change the window. On this one, the difference is that you provided the username and the password directly. In this case, I'm using it from the configuration, and you pretty much hardcode username, hardcode password, and then just create the EWS service and call it to get to send a random email, right? When you go and you do the changes from the link that we provided, this is the only line where you'll see something different compared to what you had before. After that, EWS will be used the same exact way. So if you see the code that I put together, it's pretty much same function. Let me go down here to send the email, right? To create the same email message, add whatever you have to add to it, and then you use the same exchange service object to send the email. So at the end, it's super simple. Again, this was my first experience using EWS. I put this simple application together and did the change, summarizing steps, going to create the application registration, Just copy the application ID, tenant ID. When you are instantiating your service, you create this object over here, the public client application options, set the app ID, set the tenant ID. Make sure to use this over here to match the redirection URI that you configure in the Azure portal. And after that, using the full qualified name for the scope that we're providing for EWS, that's pretty much it. You are done. You go
that seems
and acquire
so
the token.
straightforward.
Yeah, it is. It is super simple, to be honest. Again, it was the first time doing it for me. So the only point what I struggled a little bit was precisely when the redirect URIs were not matching, right?
Aha.
So I went to our documentation, and it seems this is. Let me get I can share this also in the screen. It's easier. So since this is a public client, a console application, there's a security issue with this default redirection URI that you normally get. This was compromised. Everyone knows about this, and you could just go on Bing and find all of the history behind. I did. So the way to avoid getting this one is precisely using the method from MSAL that I showed you before.
Okay.
Which is this one over here. Okay. So again, Kellyanne, the other question that I had when I was working on this for people coming from EWS, sorry. Do you think you can summarize what's the difference between the application level permissions versus delegated permissions? I also went to our support teams attending people doing these transitions, and they told me this is one of the first questions people actually have when they come from EWS, moving to Auth, and eventually as a middle step before going to the graph. One of the most common questions they have is what's the difference between application level permissions versus delegate permissions?
So in the easiest way or in the simplest way to look at it would be that an app level permissions are going to be utilized by an application when they do not have a user in front of it. If you have a user in front of it, if a user signed in and your application is accessing any service, in this case Microsoft Graph, EWS API, then you are using a delegated permission. Your application is not accessing data or authenticating with Azure AD as itself. It's authenticating a user. It wants to basically have the permissions that the user is consented to go and access this data. If you have a daemon, a Windows service, an offline process which does not have a user in front of it, you will use the app permissions is because you would simply not have anybody to authenticate other than the app itself. Usually in Azure AD parlance, if you are looking at things like scopes, then you're almost always certain to be looking at delegated permission. So in this case, if you look at the line that we have here, where we have defined a variable named EWS scopes, this is a good example of a user permission is because a user is signing in. But if you wanted to use application permission, usually the format would you will replace EWS.access as user resort with a standard defined string called .default. So yeah, that's
Perfect.
what.
Now I wanted to show the sample app you used, so I'll give folks that shortened URL. This is the app that you used to sort of take it from basic auth to modern auth, correct? Did I understand that correctly, Luberth?
Gosh. Either he's sitting very still or he's just frozen there, Shannon.
Oh no, he may have frozen.
So
Proof
while we're getting, back
right?
answer that question, though, I mean, the thing I see. So I'm kind of talking to a whole bunch of customers who are discovering a whole bunch of different apps, right? And they could be EWS based apps. They could also be POP or IMAP. And there's a lot of line of business applications. And so the common question I get is, well, okay, what do I do with this app? And it's kind of what prompted this kind of idea of trying to get Luberth and Callian to come and help here, which was you have a sort of shorter term tactical decision to make, or do you want to take a longer term strategic decision? And by that, I mean the tactical one is, can I keep the app and all the code I have and just change the authentication?
Right.
If it's no longer using BASIC and it's starting to use OAuth, then everything else just stays the same. And that's what a lot of customers do. And that's really the point of what we're showing here.
Yeah, it's interesting to note that it's not a terribly complex piece, right? It's a pretty straightforward change. And then you've secured your app, you're using OAuth, and that leads itself to better protection overall related to your apps.
Yeah, I mean, it's not only more granular security, there's a lot of security benefits to that, but also the fact that I won't break it when I turn off Basic Auth in Exchange Online later this year, right? So the other question then is like, well, what about Graph? And so, my general advice is there's time and resources are other factors now. Now, a year ago, this EWS-based app, if you were working on this now thinking, okay, well, this app is going to stop working when Basic Auth goes off, perhaps a year ago you might have thought, well, is this the right time to rewrite for Graph rather than use EWS? Because EWS is not something we're investing in anymore. We've said that years ago. EWS is very kind of stagnant, right? Not in a bad way, but we're not investing in EWS. Graph's our direction. Now, at this stage of the game, with a matter of less than 100 days until we start turning off Basic Auth, a tactical solution like just replumbing the authentication seems like a really smart, and as you just saw, potentially a very simple solution, assuming you have the code, right, and the skills.
By the way, I'm on the same page as Kelly now, so my video is not back.
No! Well,
so
you can be the voice. You can be the voice from behind the curtain, I suppose.
Brilliant. Okay.
So Greg, you have 3 personalities today. Normally you do like 5, but
I'm hearing voices. It's brilliant. Okay. Okay. Where were you before you dropped off?
Shannon was sharing the next question after we put the console application together, which is very simple and aligned to what you said, Greg, before. I was wondering, like, what about modern applications? Let's say something .NET Core or something like that, and especially because we know and we have to recognize that the next logical step is to move to Microsoft Graph. And if your functionality, whatever your application is available on Microsoft Graph, then you should go there, right? That's where the investment is. That's where the support is. However, we know we don't have full parity yet, right? Certain features are available in EWS that are not available in Microsoft Graph, right? So I had the similar question. I went ahead, did the research. I used one of our tutorials for .NET Core Microsoft Graph applications reading email, and the idea was to again align to what you said, Greg. Modify the application slightly in such a way I could also consume EWS from the same code base, right? Knowing and understanding that in certain specific scenarios, people will need to do so, right? Certain things will go and they'll get from Graph, and maybe in some specific scenarios they'll need to go to EWS, right? So at the end, using the Microsoft Identity libraries, I found that it's possible to, using a very, very basic configuration, to consume more than one API, downstream API in the same application with the same, identity libraries wrapper. So Graph comes by default, not by default, but it's very easy to configure, and the Graph service gets injected automatically. But then when you want to use another API like this legacy one, Shannon, I will send you a link. This is the best documentation that I found. So if you can share that over, to pretty much call multiple APIs from the same app. The first thing you do is, well, to configure the base URL and the scopes and for that specific API. These are the ones you use for the Graph. In this case, since the application does, the one you get in the tutorial reads email and calendar and files. This is the list of scopes being requested. For our specific example, we only want to request the EWS1 plus mail.read. So once you have the scopes section defined, you go to your startup. And again, I was expecting something way more difficult, to be honest. Thanks to Kellyanne for your help as well. The only thing you need to add is register to the container the scopes that you will be used for this API, and in the specific case EWS. So you add that specific section from your configuration with the different scopes, and then again, since you'll see when you go through the tutorial, this example over here, the token handler, let's call it that way, is injected. It's available through dependency injection from your controller, or whatever, or part of the application. So in my case, I did a wrapper for the EWS service. I'm using the token acquisition again that's injected and that was registered before in the startup. And again, super simple. The only thing that I have to do is recap. Add the scopes that I need in the configuration. Then in the startup, add that specific downstream web API. I'm not using the helpers. If you go to the documentation, you'll see that this name over here is useful if you use a helper. That doesn't work for me because this is a SOAP legacy API. It's not the JSON one. So I'm using the same service helper that I used before. And this is the only line that I need to get the access token with this specific scope. After I do this, I can just go again, create the Exchange service as I did in the console application, go into the same service URL, use this access token, and after that, it just works the same, right?
Nice.
This is regular EWS. Anyone who does EWS knows this is standard code. So I only needed a couple of lines of code plus the configuration section, and I don't even have to if I'm using delegate permissions, I don't even have to modify the application registration. So I didn't add the scope, anything like that. So the application registration that was already in place for this web app using Graph API it stays the same, right? And the only thing that I have to do is, again, those 3 steps: configuration section, registering this to the container, and then use a token acquisition instance that is already injected here to call the get access token for user async. And that's pretty much it. That's all it takes to start consuming EWS with the same let's call it authorization structure, if we may. So again, super simple to modify the application.
I like that. It's not an insane amount of code. It's a little bit of tweaks here and there, and then you're using a better authentication protocol for more protection, right? So I like that quite a bit. And I think we touched on this yesterday, and I'm going to show the documentation again. So October 1st of this year, right, Greg? October 1st.
Beginning October 1st.
Beginning October 1st, right? There's no hard cutoff at that point, but
it's going to be pretty quick. So.
Oh, okay. All right. So maybe we should operate like it's
we should,
a hard date.
Be prepared for October 1st. Yes.
Right. And then the notion of basic authentication is being turned off for Exchange Online. And there were a couple of questions that popped up yesterday. So if you're tuning in today and you missed yesterday's stream, it's only for Exchange Online. If you've got Exchange on premises, and there still are a bunch of people that do have Exchange on premises, this change will not affect what you're doing, but there are better ways to think about authentication on premises, as we touched on yesterday. But yeah, so this was in preparation for any developers that have developed apps in the realm of Exchange and kind of traditional based apps in the realm of EWS, the changes that you would have to make in order to handle that flip right around October 1st of this year.
Yeah, and let me clarify the protocols again, just so that we're all on the same page, which are, so EWS, obviously what we've talked about today, POP and IMAP, 2 legacy protocols that have been around forever. Then we have ActiveSync, Exchange ActiveSync, and then the protocols that Outlook uses, which are EWS, again, MAPI, RPC, offline address book, and then remote PowerShell. That's the other one which kind of probably might get a few people as well, which is remote PowerShell. Basic Auth is also going away. So remember, all of these protocols support OAuth. They all support OAuth already. It's just basic Auth aspect of the authentication to those protocols that is being switched off starting October 1st in Exchange Online, as you said, Chan.
Yeah, and this is kind of the starter page, right? All of the links show up within this first article, or they're on the left-hand side, like all of Microsoft documentation. So bookmark this once you land there. It's a longer URL, so we shortened it up for you so it'd be easier to go and find. And that kind of, I think, takes us to the end. Let me double check on basic auth is just so basic. It is. And it's time. It's time. It's held up over time, but it's time to move on, right? And it's one of those things that it's
as we
funny.
saw earlier, right? I mean, there are credentials stored in the app, right?
Right.
And unfortunately, what happens is anyone who has access to the source here has access to the creds, and too often those creds it's just a regular account, and sometimes a highly permissioned account, access to everything.
Right.
And we just see customers getting compromised all the time. So, let's get away from that model and get everybody more secure.
It's time. It's 2022. Things have gotten crazier. So as a result, we have to take precautions. And I mean, I think it all makes sense. And I think any customer that is a big enough customer to have worked with Microsoft for a while, even if you're a smaller customer, you probably have some familiarity with Microsoft changing things around to protect you. So it's the whole notion of the different cloud models, right? And Exchange Online, a lot of the bulk of the burden of control is on Microsoft's shoulders, right? So this is a protection for you. And I don't see any other questions. So I think, thanks to all three of you for joining this morning. I knew it was going to be a little shorter of a stream, but hopefully the folks tuning in, they now have a little bit better of an understanding as to how to change their applications around. It's pretty straightforward. Again, the documentation will also help. So let's see. Let me show that one more time. And this shows up when you go down and you look at the overview and all of the different links on the left. This does show up there. But if you want to just go see this specific app or the specific tutorial, that's the link that we showcased today. So I think, that brings it to the end. So thanks for joining again. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to figure out who we can raid. So I will take folks over to, nobody's broadcasting on Microsoft Developer, or that they follow on Microsoft Developer. So I won't be raiding everybody there. Let's go over to, let's see if we can raid somebody from our channel on the 425 show. So we've got Rockstar74. So let's start that raid. Okay, and I'm going to close this out. So thanks for tuning in, and until next time.